We did Gator Lock, and now it is time for PaintLock. This one, of course, using Smeargle's ability to change the typing of your opponent's Pokemon. If you would like to know more about Pokemon that place special counters and markers, check out that video that's on the channel. But for now, let's get into the full strategy of this deck. First of all, this is a lock deck, so it will be utilizing Dark Vileplume to help stall out your opponent and really slow down their setup so that you can get a jump on them. Some lock decks do prefer to use Noctowl, but I really like the hard trainer counter that Dark Vileplume really brings to the table. Second, we have Erika's Victreebel, which using its Pokemon power Fragrance Trap, you can pull one of your opponent's bench Pokemon out into the active position, and if you already have Dark Vileplume set up, they will have to use their own energy cards to retreat with, since Gust and Double Gust aren't going to work. Once you've pulled your opponent's benched Pokemon into the active position, you will then use Smeargle's Feint Attack to make it whatever type you want. In this case, you're going to be turning it into a Psychic type, which Smeargle conveniently has a resistance to. Once the opposing active is transformed into a Psychic type, you will swap Smeargle for Murkrow. You will then use Mean Look to trap it into the active position, and since it can't retreat, and since Gust and Double Gust cannot be used, it is stuck there. And since it is a Psychic type, it will be dealing 30 less damage to Murkrow each turn. Most of the time, you'll end up trapping a Pokemon that can't deal damage to Murkrow at all, in which gives you free reign to use Feint Attack over and over again on all of their bench Pokemon and knock them out and take prizes. It is a very complicated setup and can be difficult to pull off. However, you can really leave your opponent befuzzled if they don't know what the hell kind of deck they're up against. And that's what makes it fun to use. So let's get into what the build of this PaintLock deck actually looks like. Because there is so much setup required, Cleffa is going to be crucial to this deck. Using Eek on the first couple of turns is really going to help you get all of those evolution cards in your hand, all of the cards that you need, because for this to work, you need a Dark Vileplume, a Victreebel, a Murkrow, and a Smeargle, which is already going to take up most of the space you have in the active position and on your bench. So a full playset of Cleffa is going to help make sure that you have one to start the game with, and then also a full playset of Murkrow, because it's going to be your primary attacker. It's going to be the key to locking opponents in that active position, and then from there you can pretty much attack their active or their bench however you want with Feint Attack. And then there will be a 3-2-3 line for Dark Vileplume, starting with that Rocket Oddish. The good thing about the Rocket Oddish is that it does have 50 HP, and it's got two pretty good stally attacks, so even if you have to start the game with Oddish, you're still doing pretty well. Dark Gloom, too, it has a support ability that you can use from the bench. It is a bit risky, but if you do, get a bad coin flip and you accidentally put a special condition on a Cleffa or a Murkrow, they do have free retreat, so you can get out of it pretty easy. And then, of course, Dark Vileplume is going to help lock your opponent down. Most decks in this format used anywhere between 20 and 30, maybe more trainers in their deck. So if you use Dark Vileplume's ability to stop all trainers from entering play, then you've rendered a lot of their deck useless. They're going to end up with a lot of trainers in their hand that they absolutely cannot use. And since most decks rely on this abundance of trainers to get their setup, what they're going to have to do instead is rely on Cleffa's Eek Attack to refresh their hand over and over again until they get their cards they need. That's going to help you a lot, because that gives you plenty of time to get your setup and to get their Cleffa trapped in the active position. That way they can't really do anything. They can just refresh their hand the rest of the game until that Cleffa's knocked out, or if they have a super scoop up or something that allows it to leave play. But that's really going to give you a huge advantage very early in the game. You just have to spring your setup on them a lot faster. Speaking of which, we'll also be running a 3-2-3 line of Erika's Victreebel. Now, these cards are never going to be attacking. They're going to be on the bench, just utilizing those Pokemon powers. So this deck isn't running any grass energy at all. So if you do end up with an Oddish or an Erika's Bellsprout in the active position, you want to get a recycle energy on there and retreat it as quickly as possible. That way you can get a Murkrow or a Cleffa with their free retreat in the active position. That way you can evolve up the Oddish or the Bellsprout on the bench and get your setup done really quick. Because there are only special energy cards in here, Eco Gem is really just the go-to stadium card for this. You want to make sure you're preserving those dark or rainbow energies. Smeargle can really just live off of recycle energy, so you're not really going to be worrying too much about the Feint Attack, but you're really going to be worrying more about Mean Look and Feint Attack on the Murkrow. Like any lock deck, part of your strategy very early on is going to be to play as many trainers from your hand as possible, because once that Dark Vileplume hits play, you're not going to be playing anymore. So part of your setup is anti-setup for your opponent, where last is going to come into play, and make sure that they're not utilizing the trainers that they're drawing, that they're going all right back into their deck. That way, you can kind of stall them out a little bit, and then when Dark Vileplume enters play, then they're free to start drawing all the trainers they want, because at that point they're useless. Pokemon Breeder is going to help you evolve very quickly to get up into those Vileplumes and Victreebels early on. So if your opponent is already using Psychic-type Pokemon, then you won't have to worry about using Smeargle, really. You already have your setup on turn 2 with the help of Breeder. But, you know, if they're using every other type, you didn't see Psychic-type a lot in Base Neo, then you can actually get a turn 3 setup, swapping into Murkrow out of Smeargle on turn 3. Pokemon Trader is another important card because there are so many different Pokemon in this deck. I didn't want to weigh it down using cards like the Boss's Way because there's only one line of dark Pokemon. So using a combination of Trader, Computer Search, and Professor Oak, you're going to be able to get those cards into your hand very rapidly. You want to get set up super quick because, a lot like I said in the Gator Log video, the game slows down majorly as soon as Dark Vileplume hits play. Then you're only drawing one card per turn. You're not going to be reshuffling all that much. And because it is a lock deck, I've also included Warp Point to try to help deal with Aerodactyls and Grimers or Mucks that may hit your opponent's bench. That way you can try to knock them out before they become problematic, before they stop you from getting your full setup. If you can pull an Aerodactyl or a Muck into the active position, you can try to use Odysseus Sleep Powder to put it to sleep, which would shut down its power and let you take care of it much easier, let you get your setup done. Unlike the Gator Log deck, you know, this one isn't as crippled by a Muck, by the powers being shut down, because Murkrow can stand on its own pretty well just using the Mean Look Feint Attack combo. However, unlike the Gator Lock deck, this doesn't have a single card that can deal a huge chunk of damage all at once like Dark Feraligatr can, so it is a bit harder to deal with counter cards like an Aerodactyl. So if you know that your opponent has counter cards like that in their deck, then you want to go ahead and rush through to try to get that turn 2 Dark Vileplume down really quick, which will prevent not only Mysterious Fossil from being played because it doesn't count as a Pokemon until it's already in play, but also Fossil Egg, which can get an Aerodactyl into play turn 1. So really most of the time your priority is to play all of your trainers and get Dark Vileplume out as fast as can, and getting down your Smeargle and Victreebel comes secondary. You know, like I just mentioned, Fossil Aerodactyl can throw a huge wrench into the setup of this deck, but there are ways to deal with it that the deck does account for. Muck is much more devastating because you're going to have to use 4 turns of Feint Attack to feint this thing on the bench. So you really have to deal with it when it's still a Grimer, or it can really screw up your game. Because across the board, this deck has a pretty low HP standard, so it really only takes 1 turn for your opponent to cancel out all your powers and then quickly knock out some crucial parts of the deck. So if you do find this happening a lot, or if you're afraid of it happening, then adding in a few copies of Focus Band won't hurt. But really, as far as weaknesses go, this deck's worst enemy is its own complexity. It has a lot of moving parts, and the player's skill factors in heavily to how well this deck actually does. Just in playtesting myself, it doesn't have a very high winning percentage against the big 2, which are Metal Chansey and Sneasel variants. Especially Sneasel-Dactyl, whose simplicity and speed heavily outweigh any kind of shenanigans you can pull off with a lock deck. So while this deck can survive in competitive play, unfortunately I do have to say it's more for just fun and not so much the competitive side of things. Just because the setup hinges on getting 6 or 7 key cards at minimum. But I am curious to hear from anyone else that has tried this deck, maybe on TCG1 or in person, and just your thoughts in general about PaintLock. So thoughts, discussion, requests down in the comments. Also find me on Instagram at DrunkShuckle. And until next video, bye.